Okay, so in this lecture, I'm now going to begin a series of discussions where we talk about reactions of alkene compounds with a variety of electrophiles. And this is really the beginning of the rest of organic chemistry, where we will first delve into many different chapters that discuss a variety of polar reactions. And polar reactions are going to involve two different types of molecules or intermediates in each mechanistic step, where in a polar reaction, you will have some nucleophile, which I will abbreviate as NU, which has an electron pair, and that nucleophile is going to donate electron density towards an empty orbital at an electrophilic atom. So if you can determine the identity of the nucleophile and the electrophile in each reaction step, then you know the directionality of the arrow. And this arrow here with two barbs, or a doubly barbed arrow, indicates that two electrons are flowing from nucleophile to electrophile. Or this is a heterolytic bond formation, where two electrons come from one source and zero electrons come from the other. So later on in the course, we will discuss homolytic bond cleavage and formation. But for the majority of the reactions that we delve into, they will be polar reactions where you have a nucleophile that is donating electrons and an electrophile that is accepting electrons. So